This is the It's Just That podcast brought to you by Alpaca, growth strategists. It's just that are potentially the three most negative words in the English language, at least where business is concerned. In this podcast, we are going to be exploring some of the backstories of our favourite clients, local business people and prominent entrepreneurs, and exploring a little bit more about what's stopping them from achieving the things they dream about. For us, it was buying that Ferrari. For them, who knows? We'll be sitting down in a Ferrari, having a drive around in a Ferrari, and talking to them about their art of the possible, the things they want to achieve but thought they couldn't. Welcome to another episode of It's Just That podcast, brought to you by Alpaca. Today I'm meeting Tariq Shah of Vigo Homes at the Motorist here in Sherburn, so there should be some interesting cars as we pull in. First met Tariq at the National Brick Awards, of all places, where we had a very good and quite sober conversation about the perils of the construction industry and what we'd love to do to change it. So let's pick up Tariq and see if he's got anything interesting to say. Morning, Tariq.
Hi, Dave.
How are you?
I'm alright, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Good.
Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
It's a really cool place up here. I do love it.
It's nice, isn't it? It's not very often you get to come out for a nice coffee and you get a view like this as well.
I know. So we're both looking at a really old Mustang there. Is that a Gran Torino in the corner?
Yeah, I think it might be.
Yeah, there's an original Mini around the back as well. So if you're a petrol head, this place is absolutely fantastic.
There's a Triumph Stag on there as well.
Oh,
I saw that one.
Classic British sports car. Paragon of unreliability.
That's the whole fun of the classic car, though, isn't it? You're not going to pretend to me that your lovely Ferrari starts every morning.
Well, no, it does actually. It does do that, unless you leave the battery disconnect off, because then the battery will drain. It's more the electrical gremlins. So I was busy last night fixing the boot release. I consider myself now to be a part qualified Ferrari mechanic. I've fixed the door twice.
Yep, well done.
And yesterday we were doing some filming a couple of days ago, and the boot light was on all day, and the boot was definitely shut. And I fixed it. Yep. So I was pretty impressed with myself.
To be honest, on something like this, we don't classify that as a fault, do we? That's just it's just a feature.
Part of life. So, Tariq, you and I first met at the National Brick Awards, of all places.
Where all the best relationships start.
A fun and feisty night with Giles Brandreth. So the premise of this really was I wanted to go in a Ferrari. I had to find a way to make it happen. So we said, let's buy it. Let's do some filming with some interesting people, learn a little bit about their backstory, and then dig into what we call their It's Just That, which is that it's either that intractable problem that's not getting solved, or it's the opportunity that's just out of reach, and for whatever reason you're not quite capitalising on it. So there probably won't be any aha moments whilst we're sat here, but it's an opportunity to be trapped in a Ferrari for half an hour, forced to think, rather than falling into that bear trap we often do of going, well, I can't do that because, and everyone nods and smiles and says, no, of course you can't. Well, this is the opportunity to go, well, what if you had to? How would we do it?
But isn't it always a problem that we spend our entire lives caught in the detail? And it's taking that time actually to get out, sit in a Ferrari and let your thoughts go wild.
Exactly. And for us, we're hoping that more clients will see it, or potential clients will see it and say, I'll tell you what, let's go out in the Ferrari boardroom for an hour. It's a bit like those old timeshare things you had to sit through in the 80s if you wanted free tickets to the water park. We'll come and help you solve some of your business problems, but or you can have a ride in a Ferrari, but you've got to talk to us for an hour about it. So I'm a blighter for not timing properly. I want to watch this time so we can do 10 minutes of backstory. I'll try and keep us to time, just so that you don't get bored of me. But if we do sort of 10 minutes on how did you get to where you are? What's the backstory? What is it you're currently doing? What do you spend most of your time doing? And then from there we'll move into the It's Just That.
Okay, so well, I guess I'm a property person is probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of different things in property. So I've done everything from sort of renting residential, renting flats and houses out, all the way through to big brownfield redevelopment work, new housing development. We work in London.
I saw an interesting one in London you doing on LinkedIn recently. That was quite...
Project in Chelsea that we've recently sold, is that?
Yeah, yes. So it looked very upscale.
Lovely house in a great location. And the nice thing about that sort of stuff is we get to put some really nice specification into it. We get to really think about design. Oh, that sounds nice, doesn't it? We get to spend some time in thinking about the detail, which is what we really love doing. Whatever we're doing. And a lot of the time it's too easy just to get caught into that. You know, we're going to keep on doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. So have you always been in that world then? Did you?
So we're a family business. So my grandfather in 1966 bought his first house and garage and did it up and rented it out.
Right.
And it sort of grew from there really. So my father joined him in the 70s. I grew up in the business and then left university, and literally I had my final exam in the morning and I was on site in the afternoon.
Right.
So it was a bit of a baptism of fire in there.
Yeah.
And
so have you done different jobs throughout that then? When you say we were on site, were you literally in a hard hat and a high vis?
Yep. So there's not much in the business that I've not done at some point. What we worked out is I've got absolutely no skill whatsoever in any of the building, in actually doing any of the work.
Yeah.
But I've got a reasonable understanding of a lot of it, and I think that background is really important. You know, it's really easy to look at the business from the outside and say, actually, this is all really straightforward.
Yeah.
And why don't people do things like this, and why don't you do that? But actually, getting the understanding there's usually a reason behind the way things are done.
Yeah.
And there's usually a history behind it. And so having that growing up through the business and growing up with the business has sort of helped to try and understand some of that.
So how has the business evolved then since you've been at the helm?
So we do more now than we did before. So that's one of the big things is obviously everybody who runs the business is looking for growth.
Yeah.
But growth isn't the be all and end all. We get to do some more interesting things now. So obviously as we've grown, what that's meant we can do is we can buy bigger sites. We can do things in places that we wouldn't have been able to do previously.
Yeah.
And we can take risks that we couldn't have taken. So we can try stuff out. We can play with things. We can buy sites where we can see some real potential for them. We can afford to sit on them and to work them for a number of years before we see those results coming out. It means that we're not quite as sort of driven by immediate results we might have been sort of at the start of my career, which opens up some real opportunities. So when we start thinking about big, large-scale master planning projects, we can look at them take a long-term view on them. We look at some of our projects. We'll look at those and we'll look at them on a multi-generational basis. So we'll be thinking about what do we do now that will impact on my children or even on their children.
Yeah.
Going forward.
And is that? I'm guessing that brings in all the elements these days of housing shortages and ESG being a big thing, carbon footprints, and thinking about the next generation of what that needs to look like.
Yeah, this is really fashionable at the moment. Everybody wants to talk about an ESG strategy, and
that's why I weaved it in. It made me sound clever. Know what it means.
But the thing is, actually, this is the sort of stuff that we've been doing. We call it investing in communities.
Yeah.
So we don't like to build stuff that we don't believe in. I don't like doing projects that I don't feel passionate about.
Right.
And the reason for that is because actually we look at this intergenerationally. It means that if we're investing into our communities, that's good for our business in the long term.
Yeah.
If you're only looking at what do our shareholder returns look like in 12 months, it's really difficult to look at what's good for the community and what's good for your business over a much longer period.
Yeah. It's kind of a soapbox of mine, that one as well. It's really difficult to do, isn't it? You mentioned growth. Everyone's looking for growth, and for a while Alpaca has kind of called itself growth strategist, and we've slightly moved away from that because there's almost a negative connotation to growth. I think you alluded to there. If you list and you become controlled by shareholder return, then you're always looking at quarter 2 or quarter 3 or quarter 4. You compare this with the Victorian model of building, for example, where you built infrastructure, you built a bridge and said this won't pay for itself for 100 years, but it'll still be here in 400. Mm-hmm. Or the Japanese model of investing, which is to look the next 100 years or 200 years. We've lost that, and I think Alpaca, we're trying to pull ourselves back to that. And go, growth is okay, but let's make sure it's the right kind of growth. Let's look more at opportunity than just the growth.
The short term is really easy to look at. It's when you start to look, and it's not just growth; it's also value as well. And that's a big thing when we sit down, when Dad and I, or when my wife and I, or Mum and Dad and I, when we sit down, we're not just talking about how do we maximise profits. We're not just talking about how do we minimise cost. We're also talking about how do we maximise value. If we invest this today, does that reduce our cost in the long term? If we invest this today, does that increase our income in the long term? Are we buying this for the right reasons? Are we doing this project for the right reasons? Is now the right time for us to get out of a particular business because we're no longer the best people to be custodians of it? Or is now the time to invest into better management? Is it the time to invest into education and skills? So all of these sort of questions, they're not just about the short-term benefit. They're all about we're looking at them with one eye on how does this impact us over the next 12 months? Because all businesses have to look at cash flow is the thing that makes or breaks businesses at the end of the day. Well, certainly breaks businesses. It might not make them.
I don't know. If I could find that magic money tree we've all heard about, I would be a happier man.
But that's cash flow in the short term is absolutely crucial. That is what business is all about in the today and tomorrow. You can't pay the gas bill with value. But once you get beyond having to worry about that cash flow, then value becomes a much more important question. And relationships equal value as well. So if you think about the last sort of 2 years, while we've been talking about supply chain challenges over the pandemic, we've been talking about shipping and some of the problems around getting product and materials and people to the right jobs. Actually, what's really helped us, I think, is that we have people that we really trust, both internally and externally. So we work with partners that we've worked with not just for many years, but sometimes for many generations. We've got partners like one of your companies, Vigo Group, who we've worked with for a number of years. But we've got partners who we've worked with who are third generation, fourth generation family businesses as well, and we've worked with them since my grandfather started the business. And individual small suppliers who are similar, and those relationships we built with those, where it's not about the individual transaction, where we're not trying to cost minimize, or we're not trying to profit maximize on that one relationship, but we're trying to make sure that we all exist and we thrive in the long term. Those relationships have been really powerful in the last couple of years, and I think that a lot more businesses are starting to see the value in that now. That the pound today isn't necessarily the only thing that matters. And I think that's what we've been good at doing for many years. And to be honest, that was one of the first things that I learned when I came into business. It was the first thing that my father said to me when I started working, was that the people that are around us are the most important asset, if you want to call it that, in the business. But the most important thing in the business is those people that are around us, and both our internal people and also those external.
So how hard is it to focus on all of those things you mentioned? Because it is one of those, I'm guilty now of nodding and smiling, and of course value sounds like a brilliant idea, but having run a few just very small businesses, I know how hard it is to find the money, and then depending on who's giving you the money, it comes with strings. So how hard is it to find those partners who are going to give you the money and also allow you to do everything you've just said and build those long-term relationships without demanding their return or pound of flash back the other way?
So there's two parts of it. One is that if you want to go for the maximum growth in the shortest possible period, then you are going to have to be mercenary about about how you do that and what you do. And the kind of partner that will fund you for growth in the very short term, very high growth in the very short term, probably isn't the kind of partner that wants to talk about long-term relationships and long-term value. But what we've done is we've spent a long time, again, when we talk about partnerships in our supply chain, we also think about partnerships in our funding as well. So the banks and the funding and the funders that we work with are people that we've built long-term relationships with.
It's a rather large tractor and somebody trying to get around it at the same time.
Yeah, we probably don't want to scratch the paintwork on this.
I lost concentration there for a minute. I thought, just bear with me whilst I go on that track.
So, but those funding partners do exist. Those funding partners that will take a long-term view,
Yeah.
that want to grow a business and want sustainable long-term business. But that also means, from our perspective, that we don't always get the cheapest funding. It means that we don't always get.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
In our world, in real estate, it's a lot of it's about loan to value or loan to cost. We're not taking the highest loan to value and the highest loan to cost, but we're building relationships with them. And we also work with professionals. We work with a good team of professionals. So our broker George, who works with us on a lot of our funding, even those deals where we could go direct to a funder, will often work with George because we see value in working with him, rather than working directly.
So what do you spend most of your time doing? What's not so much a day in the life, but what takes up most of your time? Is it finding the new sites, finding the money, or just moving the pieces around?
Yes to all of those.
Yes.
I think anybody who runs a business will tell you that it's I guess a bit like juggling or a bit like spinning plates. There's everything is important. Juggling plates, exactly. Everything is really important all the time.
Yeah.
So everything, all of those bits, the operations are really important. Your people are really important. The funding is really important. Making sure that we've got a constant deal flow coming through. Because of the nature of what we do, we have to keep those deals coming through. We have to keep those sites coming through. Relationships with our suppliers and our partners is really important. Keeping on top of the finance and making sure that our cash flows are working well is really important. But in each of those areas of the business, we've got good teams that teams of people that work on those.
Yeah.
So both internal and external. So a lot of my time is spent supporting, upskilling, mentoring, and working with our team internally, and also with our partners externally to make sure that we're getting great value. And then there's times when we're, I do a lot of site finding and a lot of the acquisition work. So that takes up a lot of time, but it's a really important part of the business. And it's also really important that our partners, when we're acquiring a site, that vendors that they feel that they've got a relationship, they've got somebody they can talk to who can make a decision. So
I could style it out, but I wanted to go down that. I wanted to go down there.
I did wonder why we're going back on ourselves.
I thought, will he comment? Will I be able to get away with it? But no. So that's where I'm going. My internal sat nav missed a junction.
It does look really pretty around here, though. So I'm really glad that you gave us an extra tour of it.
It does. It's a part of the country most people don't know. I used to work in Leeds. And if ever any of my colleagues came out, they're like, where the hell do you live? It's like the other side of the moon. But it's not. It's just the side of that side of the A1 that no one comes out to.
I'm pleased to hear that you know these roads, though, because there's been a few times when I've seen a corner coming up, and I've thought, are we going a bit too fast to get around that corner in this car?
I'm not sure
with this driver.
I'm trying to work out, is it a compliment or not a compliment, or
well, we're still on the road, so
we are still definitely on the road. And
I'm feeling more and more confident in your driving and in this lovely car every corner we go around.
Good. Let's see if we can get you to where we're going all in one piece.
One of those wonderful things to see on the horizon here, one of the great things about Britain is getting out of the big cities and into the countryside, and we've got beautiful countryside, great green spaces. One of the wonderful things that we get to do in development is we get to think about biodiversity, and we get to think about how we. So a lot of the work we do is on brownfield sites, and actually getting to protect some of this countryside is great. Even though we know that it's not you can't protect all of this countryside, but be able to protect the really good stuff by reusing brownfield land is really important. But then to see across that beautiful green countryside something big and industrial. There's a power station, what looks like a power station in front of us, I think.
Yes, there are quite a few out here.
And to see that huge piece of sort of industrial architecture set against the very flat green land, it just really it just stands out, and it reminds us of the impact that we as sort of built environment people, the impact that we have for generations. The work that we do, this doesn't last for 2, 3, 5, 10 years. It's not like building a car which is transitory, or running a professional services business where your impact is, it's seen today and it's not necessarily seen tomorrow.
Wait. It's professional service. You're saying lawyers are transitory and superficial and not important?
The work that they do remains, but nobody sees that.
My contracts will stand up for 100 years. I'll have you know.
We'll come back in 100 years' time and see. But in 100 years' time, people will still be looking at that power station.
Yeah.
They'll still be looking at some of these buildings that we're driving around here now, and they'll still have an impact on the environment and the way that people live their lives.
So, taking that as the platform, then I've got to ask you about the It's Just That, or I'll get into trouble. What is your It's Just That? Are we looking at an intractable problem or an opportunity that you want to capitalise on?
Both, actually. Aren't the best opportunities always a problem that needs to be solved? Over the last few years, the thing that has taken some of my attention and thought is, how do we make construction more efficient, and particularly how do we make house building more efficient?
Yeah.
You look at all the stats, and we talk about house building as being one of the least productive, or construction as being one of the least productive industries in the UK and in the world.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the reasons behind that, and actually I don't think that's to do with a lack of skill. I don't think it's to do with anything really big, but I think what we have is we have a problem of trust in our industry. So when we as an industry, when we talk to clients, so we know the story about when the builder comes around to your house and does your extension, and he says it's going to be 6 weeks, it's going to be 12 weeks really. And when he says it's going to be there on Tuesday, it really means a week on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And when he says it's going to cost you £50,000, you know that he means £70,000.
Yeah.
And that to me is a problem. And that's not just the builder that comes to do your extension, that's all the way through the industry.
Yeah. It's a problem to me as well, because I've had a builder cancel twice through lockdown, and they're definitely coming 6 months ago. I haven't seen them yet. I don't think they're coming.
Now, sometimes that might just be that they, you get a bad builder who comes along and signs up every job and has no intention of, takes a deposit and has no intention of coming and doing it for another 6 or 12 months. But I don't believe that's the case most of the time. I think fundamentally people are good and they're trying to do a good job. But we have a problem in that we don't collect data correctly in construction. We collect it in a way, quite often, particularly in SME construction, we collect data on who's doing what on site and what work's being carried out on paper, and then it's really difficult to manipulate that data afterwards and use it to look back and say, actually, what did we do? What went to plan? What didn't go to plan?
And I assume there's a lag as well as to how quickly someone's filling in that paperwork.
Yep, if they're filling in the paperwork.
Yeah.
We have a lack of trust in that information. So even where we've got digital systems, people don't believe them. So I talked to a painting decorating contractor who works for some of the big house builders, and they said that they have to send somebody out to every single plot to check that it's ready for them before they arrive there, because they don't trust what the site manager's telling them. Now it's a cost. It's a huge cost. It's a wasted cost.
That's going to hit the productivity.
Yeah, which is productivity. When we talk to buyers and our sales team say to our buyers that we've got a construction deadline, quite often I don't think they actually believe that, because they know that in the construction industry we expect to miss targets and miss deadlines. And I don't think we don't do it intentionally as an industry, but I think that we just don't have the information to hand to accurately monitor what's happened in the past and then use that information to predict the future. And if you look at a business like Amazon, or you look at logistics, how logistics is carried out now, that has become that logistics industry has become so much more efficient as a result of having data about where things are, when things are moving, what's happened in the past, what customer preferences look like.
Yeah, it reminds me of the conversation we had, if we keep coming back to the National Brick Awards, when we were both saying, you mentioned it, Alpaca owns a brick merchant up in the northeast, and that industry, traditionally at least, has worked on the basis of they'll take any orders that you give them, but they factor in that there will be a cancellation. A little like airlines used to be. We'll book 120% of the seats because someone will cancel and we'll end up with a full plane at the end of it. What that means for us in the brick industry has been you can order as many things as you want and cancel with no penalty.
Yep.
But as soon as we've hit a supply constraint, which has happened thanks to COVID, when the brick manufacturers stopped making, they closed their kilns, suddenly there's a supply constraint that there hasn't been for a long time. Orders went through the roof, and then we were having our orders cancelled at a moment's notice by the suppliers.
But
and there are no
happens?
incentives in that world for they will take the order and cancel it, but we can't guarantee how many orders are going to get cancelled. So people on our side of the fence will over-order, knowing there's a risk that we might have our order cut. Mm-hmm. But the suppliers are sat at the other end going, we know you've over-ordered, so we don't feel guilty cancelling some of your orders. It's a hugely inefficient system.
But as soon as you say to me that there's a shortage, what do? I go and bring forward my orders for future sites.
Yeah.
Because actually, I'm not quite sure when I'm going to need those bricks. I'm not exactly sure how many I'm gonna need in what time period, and so I bring them forward because I'd rather have too many, or I'd rather order them too early and then keep on pushing that back.
Yeah.
Than I would order them too late and find that I've not got them there when I need them. So as soon as you tell me there's a supply constraint, my immediate reaction is to overorder. As soon as I overorder, the industry says, oh well, we've got a huge amount of extra demand there. What do we do? And then they panic about that.
Yeah.
So they either reduce, they either cut orders or they increase production capacity, which creates a glut.
Unintended consequences. So it's just that
bullwhip effect.
How do we get the whole construction industry to trust each other more and use data?
Yeah.
Simple. How do we do that? I'm on board.
Okay, I'm glad we've solved that. So moving on to the next one then. So I think part of it is actually at the most fundamental level. So how do we figure out how we can capture data better about what is happening now and what has happened in the past? And there's sensor technology out there now that wasn't there even a few years ago, or that wasn't available and accessible and robust and cheap enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a way that we can use that sensor data to start tracking a bit better what's happening. But also standardization. So I think there's some big opportunities for example, government programs around affordable housing. If we want to start delivering more council housing, more affordable housing, then actually government can do that in a way that is, they can use their convening power to create standards around the work that they're doing there, and to support SMEs to build a more standardized product for them, and then monitor how that's built and what's put in place there. But then fundamentally we need the platform to communicate. How do we share openly the programs that we're planning, and how do we get the manufacturer, the developer, the contractor, the distributor, the manufacturer, and the end customer all into that program to understand what we're expecting to do and how that's moving.
Are you describing a literal platform in that sense? You've used the analogy of Amazon, so I'll steal it. In that you build the sort of Amazon for construction and go, you people can plug into this platform provided you play by our rules in terms of data sharing. Is that what you envisage?
Yeah. And I think, so there's stages to this. So actually, anything that improves communication, anything that improves the trust in the information that's coming from customer to supplier, or from developer to customer, or developer to contractor, and even funders, anything that improves the flow of information that's going to theirs and the trust that we can have in that data is an improvement. But I think that the dream would be the way that we sort of we get over some of these big issues, and the way that we resolve them is by bringing everybody together, giving everybody access to the same information, so that we're not dealing with information that's being filtered and being adjusted and being altered to fit the story that we want to tell. And that's hard. That's hard for developers. It's hard for contractors. It's hard for suppliers to say, actually, we're going to have to give some messages that we don't really want to give. Which is that construction has fallen behind on this project because of something that's happened. That we have planned this incorrectly, and then you need long-term partners in funding who recognise that actually these problems will happen, and that because we're looking at this on a long-term basis, we're not so worried about a delay on this particular project. We want to understand why that's happened. How can we invest in the future? How can we use training and upskilling? Actually, how can we find a problem, bring everybody around it, maybe even bring people from outside of our own business around that problem, and say what went wrong here and how can we fix that in the future? Not putting blame on somebody that this has gone wrong. Not trying to lay blame at the doors of a subcontractor or blame at the doors of a contractor, but trying to find out how we can make sure that this problem doesn't keep on reoccurring.
It's sort of the classic law of unintended consequences, isn't it? As you see in I guess medicine's the obvious one that springs to mind. Nobody wants to think of mistakes or accidents in medicine, but the culture that accidentally perpetuates is nobody admits mistakes.
Yeah. So
you hide them, you manipulate the data, you pretend that you're not making mistakes. The people that appear not to make mistakes are the ones who progress, and it's not real.
No.
Those mistakes are going to happen. So who's solved this problem somewhere else? Because it strikes me it is a little bit like, without being too theoretical, the game theory and the prisoner's dilemma in a sense, isn't it? It would be in everybody's best interests if they all talked and shared data, but they're all scared of sharing data in case the next person doesn't share data or the next person uses that data against them. So how do you crack that nut?
The example that I really like is the one of the car industry.
Yeah.
So, you look at Toyota, for example. Toyota's production system is incredible in the way that they change that industry completely.
Yeah.
And they change, the type of car that we buy now, the expectations we have of those cars, the value that a customer gets from those cars is just completely different to what it was in the 1960s.
We're going back to the Triumph Stag here, aren't we? The Friday afternoon Stag.
My dad, my father, he always wanted. He's got a 1964 Mark II Jaguar. Beautiful car, beautifully made.
Is that the one that they used to push into shot every week in Inspector Morse?
That's exactly it. Yeah, we have to push it into shot every week when we want to drive it as well. And I've got a 1986 I bought for my little girl when she was 1. A 1986 Porsche 924S automatic. And
I could nerd out at this point. Originally designed as an Audi, classic car.
Well, the engine in the original 924 was the VW engine.
Yeah.
But the 924S is all Porsche.
No, you're absolutely right.
And it has a detune 944 engine. And it's just they're both amazing pieces of machinery.
Yeah.
Both for different reasons actually. The Jaguar is a real piece of art. It's hand built, and you can tell that it's coach built. The lines don't quite work. When you start it usually starts. It's an artwork, and yet you look at 20 years later, you look at the Porsche, and the Porsche is manufactured to completely different standards.
Yeah.
You get in it, you turn it on, it starts. I don't worry about whether or not that car's going to start because it just runs.
Yeah.
It's comfortable and it's smooth, and you can drive it on the motorway, and actually in a lot of ways you don't know you're not in a modern car. But it's also really cool as well. And it's got pop-up headlights, and everybody loves pop-up headlights.
It is. I've seen a picture. They do. Yeah, like this. Nobody can.
Yes.
Nobody can see that, but you and I. But yes, I can see that. I can see that popping up. As we hit a mini roundabout that I want to go round, but I'm now nervous this thing won't get round in one. Having this turning circle of a super tanker.
There's only a bus full of people there watching.
Yeah. Oh, look at that! That was never in doubt. Never in doubt at all. Sorry. So you made the point about Toyota and the analogy. How do we apply that to the world of construction? Because it's a very disaggregated world, isn't it?
And that's the problem. Fundamentally, there's so many different moving parts of this, and actually there's so much money in it as well, and there's so many people making money that in a way that they've done for so many years. There's no incentives to change. There's big costs in changing and big risks in changing.
Yeah.
And also there's an awful lot of very small businesses within the industry who it's really difficult to get everybody on board to make that change.
Yeah.
And actually, what's the incentive for a plumbing subcontractor? Maybe a guy who's an individual subcontractor.
Yeah, the sole trader.
What's the incentive for him to start capturing data and recording that data?
Yeah.
What's the incentive for him to then share that data with a main contractor? What's the incentive for the main contractor to share that data with the developer? Why would they do something that's costing them money or that's costing them time without seeing a short-term gain from it?
So how do you answer that question then? Because you're positing it as a rhetorical question, and I'm agreeing. Yeah, what is the incentive? So, what is the incentive? How do we get them? How do we get them to do that?
I think it comes from funding. So we have to have funding partners that are on board with this over the medium term, who are prepared to look at things a little bit differently, who are prepared to work with us to try and build a funding structure that gives confidence to all the way through the value chain, from developer to main contractor to supplier, that the funds are there in order to get these jobs completed. And that if they do the job that they're supposed to do, so that they know what the job is that we're expecting, they understand what good quality and good finish looks like, they understand what their role is in the whole process. But once they get to that, they're going to get paid for doing that, because fundamentally within construction, there's an awful lot of underpayment and funding challenges.
So do you almost need to go vertically integrated for a while and hire those pilot study with hire those people to get them to share the data and then let that proliferate out into the real world? That window's a lot closer than I expected.
Potentially, but I'm not sure that's a solution to the problem.
Right.
Because all you do then is you create a structure where you can collect that data by hiring people directly, and actually by investing money into data collection. Right. But that you don't create a situation where in the long term you can continue capturing that data. So I think you've got to find a way to incentivize the existing structure to capture that data, because otherwise you're never going to change an industry, you're only going to change your business.
What's that next step for us then? Well, I've just brought myself into your world of let's fix this, but what's the next step as we're pulling into the very lovely Carlton Towers?
So there's a technical challenge here. There's a technical challenge about how do we capture that data? How do we use tech in order to make that data capture simpler? And then there's also, I think, an operational challenge. In how do we encourage, what's the incentives to encourage people working on those construction sites, whether that's main contractors management, whether that's individual subcontractors. What's the incentive that we use to encourage them to capture that data and to start us on that process? And some of that will be financial. Some of it has to be around, if we can capture this data better, we can get you paid more quickly, and we can across an industry, we can reduce some of these late payments and non-payments.
Like it or not, it's always about money.
Of course it is. But part of it will also be things like gamification. It'll be how do we make sure that subcontractors and main contractors are getting more work as a result of engaging with this. How can we differentiate between good, average and bad? And how can we communicate that effectively? Because actually for a lot of construction companies, I think one of the big barriers to growth is being able to access really, really good people. And understanding what good looks like. And for those subcontractors, particularly for those smaller subcontractors, it's understanding for a particular developer or a particular main contractor, what does great really look like and how can they add value for them? And
so in summary, it's just that we need to redefine an entire industry.
Yeah, that's it. Easy.
And on that note, I've stopped because it's your turn to drive us back.
Oh, perfect.
It's not a dustbin. I really should have bought one with cup holders. So now we briefly get to play the handbrake challenge, and then you get to drive us back. So the handbrake is down by your right hand side. The trick to it is sort of push it down into the carpet, so lift it up and down into the carpet. No, fail one, so back up and down again. No, fail two. 3.
Do you have to hit it really hard?
No, you don't. There's a knack that's hard to describe, because it's kind of lift it up and then as you push it down, just give it a bit of a push down into the carpet. But it makes for good video when the people can't do it. Right then, Tariq.
Well, that made a lovely noise, didn't it?
It did make a lovely noise. So did you pass your test first time?
Second time round.
Second time, what happened the first time?
Yeah, it didn't quite go to plan. I tried to go up quite a narrow road and found there was a car coming towards me.
Right.
And didn't quite know how to get out of that then.
Did we hit something?
No, we didn't hit anything.
Oh, okay.
But we ended up face to face with another car, and he didn't want to move and I didn't know how to move.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that seems harsh. That's yeah. What do you do in that scenario?
Reverse, turns out.
Right, okay. And what was your first car then?
The first car was a Vauxhall Corsa. A brand new one, actually, because you got free insurance for the first year.
Ah, right, okay.
And free insurance when you're 17, you've just passed your driving test, is worth a lot.
I'm wondering if I'm gauging your age now, because I consider myself the last of that era, that when I passed my test at age 17, they didn't exist. So this was 97. I passed my test about 6 weeks after my 17th birthday and bought a 1983 Suzuki Alto, classic baked bean tin blue.
Very nice.
But 6 months later, all my friends were buying Saxos, Puntos, and Corsas because they had that offer. They all had, and that was sort of the last of the era where you bought an old car and absolutely coveted it. Suddenly, everybody was in a new one, and I don't know what the next generation are doing. Are people buying those cars now, or is that generation just not buying cars at all?
I mean, I think there's definitely a decline in car ownership, isn't there?
Yeah.
And we go through phases. You know, I remember when I was first working. We started investing into London quite heavily, into central London, and we were in a phase when living centrally was really, really fashionable.
Yeah.
And I think we're still in that era where living close to all of the amenities is still super fashionable.
Yeah.
And you've seen that with development in places like Birmingham and Manchester and Leeds. But it is just a phase. So I think over the pandemic we've seen people moving away from towns, away from big cities to a degree. Although interestingly, I think New York is one of the fastest growing places in the US at the moment in terms of people moving back into
That's
it.
an interesting one, but yeah, that's where we come back to data and what data can tell you. It was the fastest. It lost people the fastest during the pandemic, didn't it? There was a mass migration out of New York, where everybody just ran for the hills, and I don't think it's seen an exit or an exodus like that since the 70s. And then they're coming back, which is a bit like what happened in London. There's a real pendulum swing, isn't there, with COVID, which you must be seeing as a developer of. Well, are you seeing it as a developer? Are people asking for different things? Are people asking for bigger houses out in more rural areas so they can work from home, or is that shift that we've heard about overhyped?
I mean, there was definitely a demand for bigger houses. There was definitely a lot of activity in the market, people wanting to move, but quality as well. I think quality's been a big thing, because all of a sudden you're sat in your home so much more, and you see those little defects, you see those things that aren't quite done right. So for a developer like us, where we try and do things properly, that's been quite a good thing for us. So what we're seeing now is that people will come to us and they'll say that they can see the increased value that they get from us rather than going to one of the big house builders. And there's definitely a place for big house builders. They do phenomenally well, but I think there are more people now who recognise the value in going to a sort of more bespoke house builder. Yeah,
it's options, isn't it? One last chance to make it loud if you want. While I ask you what, best car, worst car?
So, the worst car I've ever had was a Toyota Starlet.
The one you made money on?
But it was cool.
Right, okay.
It was cool because it was perfect for that time.
Yeah.
My favourite car I ever had was a Porsche Panamera. And I loved the car. The car was lovely. It was a lovely place to be in. It did its job really well. But actually mostly because of the memories I made in that. And I was really sad to sell that one in the end, because it was a car that I drove from my wedding. It was a car that I picked my daughter up from the hospital in. It's the one that I'll never forget. Because it's just got so many memories about so many wonderful times. And that's what a car is, isn't it? So that was why I bought the 924S. I didn't buy it particularly because I wanted the car. I love the car, but it's not really about that. It's because I remember my dad had a Rolls-Royce Flying Spur, the first Rolls-Royce with a turbo engine. Cool. And I remember we pulling up at places in that. I remember the things that we did in that. When we visited our farm for the first time was in that car. Going up to a cattle auction and buying a lamb. And I was upset because I didn't want to leave it there and have it brought back in a lorry, so we brought it back in the back of the Rolls Royce.
I wanted to say that, and I thought, no, he didn't, but you brought it. Is it right? Okay, in the back with the champagne coolers?
In the back in a box.
Right. Okay. That's...
on my knee. And you make so many memories in cars. They're such an integral part of everything that we do day to day.
Yeah.
And that's really what the car's all about. It's not about the speed or the value or having something that's really expensive and flashy. It's all about the memories you make in the car.
Yeah.
But isn't that it though? A sports car that you can't get the kids in. Where's the joy in that now?
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's definitely why we bought the one with the 4 seats here. Stick the kid seats in the back, took them down to Donington, let them eat crisps and popcorn in the back of it. They loved it, and they'll have that memory forever. Remember when Dad had a Ferrari for a couple of months? That's the point of it. So thank you for indulging me and having a go in my Ferrari.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me a go in the Ferrari. This has been amazing.
And from there, let's go transform the world of construction.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers, Tariq.
Thank you.